Hello, kids. Welcome back. It's another month, so you know what that means. It's another time. Let me try that again. It's the time for another Chichester Chats. I am Phil, and it's an early Saturday morning. Lilith is here, of course, and of course, the man of the hour. We couldn't do this without him, Mr. DG Chichester.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Lilith. It's always great to see you guys. And this Chichester chat, I don't know, it feels like I need that cardigan sweater and like the slipper shoes and stuff. So I'll get into that for the next time.
A little fireplace.
Exactly, a little trolley train. It's very Mr. Rogers.
Change your shoes, change your sweater.
Exactly.
I got the good mic out for you guys.
Ooh, fancy.
All right, so this time we're talking terror, at least the first 5 issues. So this was the first time I was reading this. I don't know about you, Lilith. Like I'd run into terror when he showed up in Daredevil or other places in the Marvel universe. So,
well, I'm a horror fan, and I'm actually a huge fan of Epic. So I already kind of was very familiar.
So, sir, could you go a little bit into the background of this character, his beginnings, and?
Sure. And that's wild. That's you guys, have only sort of been exposed to him in other titles in a way. So I'm really interested in kind of hearing, what the impression is. I mean, for listeners who don't know who this character is, and I think there's probably a fair share of people who don't, the ones who do probably don't forget it. He's sort of like this ancient character. We don't really know all the details of his background. It's kind of mythic in a way. His name is Terror, but he's gone by different words for terror over the years. Shrek, which is German for terror, or Vries, which is another language, and Formador, which I believe is Italian. So he's gone by all these different names, and the idea is that he's existed through history in this kind of mythic way. And in our day and age, he's not quite slumming it because he lives pretty well, but he's operating pretty much as a mercenary for hire, or sometimes called like a horror for hire, which he hates. And the reason he can do this is because he has the ability to grab onto people's body parts and take them off them, and then put them on his own body. And in doing so, he gets the abilities that they had. So if it was a marksman's eye, he can now see like a marksman and sort of aim like a marksman. If it's a locksmith's hand, you can now pick locks and safe crack. So he's got the ultimate utility kit based on other people's bodies. And the background of this character is he began in the Epic titles, the Shadowline titles, as a boogeyman, a kind of the main villain for a character called St. George. And St. George, by the name, was kind of the epitome of the knight in shining armor, and we needed a bad guy, and Shrek became that bad guy. And then over time, and maybe you guys want to ask some specific questions, or I just ramble on about it, but he was transitioned over to the Marvel universe and became Terror, and took on a somewhat different but same identity in that way.
So you're saying he was like he was like the main bad guy then in that Epic line, that Shadowline stuff. So is that your decision? You're like, yeah, I want to make him an anti-hero. I like this character.
Well, I did love the character, and I figured once the Shadowline stuff was over, that was kind of it. There wasn't a big chance that they were going to return to a bunch of Shadowline specials. He was, as I said, the main adversary probably of St. George. There were 3 main Shadowline titles, and then we did a big mini series called Critical Mass, which sort of wrapped up the stories in a lot of ways, and he definitely threaded through that. But a little bit afterwards, Carl Potts, who was at that point one of the editors-in-chief at Marvel, when Marvel sort of split itself up into a couple editors-in-chief, or was that the point? Well, he was definitely the editor-in-chief of the Epic line at that point, and Carl and I had a great relationship and continue to. But he called up and he said, listen, we're thinking about doing some kind of assembly of a lot of the horror characters in Marvel. Man Thing and Werewolf by Night and whatever else. And we want to bring them together. We're not quite sure how yet, but we thought that it might need a kind of a crypt keeper sort of character that would be either the introduction to these characters, or maybe he would be the conduit between it. And a lot of us thought that Shrek could be that character. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, Shrek is over there. How do you bring him over here? Obviously, I was thinking way too logically. Like, I can take other people's body parts, and I'm worried about how we're going to move him from one book to the other. And Carl, said, well, don't worry about that. We'll figure that out. But are you game to do it? So of course I said I was game to do it. I spent probably a hot second thinking about it, and then Carl calls back and says, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. Which was probably because ultimately, things would become the Midnight Suns, and a lot of those horror characters, not all of them, but some of those horror characters would move over there. But he said, but why don't we just do something anyway? Why don't we just create a Marvel title with him as the central character, and he could become his own thing, and he can be this mercenary that he is, and we'll just sort of reverse engineer him into Marvel. And I said, man, if you're game, I'm game. And we were kind of off to the races. It was that simple. And it felt very under the radar, although clearly it was not. They were doing a major character or a major, a title launch, and it would be part of this set of titles called the Big Guns, although we got sort of like the short shrift on some promotional things. But it was one of 5 or 6 titles of mercenaries that came out. There was a big poster. So it wasn't like we did this behind the scenes, but it was that simple in terms of Carl saying, let's do it. And me just saying, yeah, let's go. And then Mark McLaurin became the editor, and then, helped make a lot of the decisions that would then further bring it to life.
Yeah. So there were talks maybe about having him in the Midnight Suns, or that came later? Because like that was my thought. I'm like, why wouldn't this character be in the Midnight Suns?
Yeah, no, there was never any talk of that. I think that whole talk of that crypt keeper thing, I'm using that term, although that wasn't specifically the role he probably would have played. That sort of presaged the Midnight Suns. And I think once the Midnight Suns stuff started to take root, which of course nothing took root until we got together, the bunch of us at this conference center for a couple of days, and then created the Midnight Suns and created Lilith. And, there were the individual titles that Bobby Chase knew she wanted in this universe, but that's where we came up with all the Midnight Sun stuff. But there was never any conversation of bringing it over. I mean, I could have easily done it, I guess, because I was writing Night Stalkers, and it wouldn't have been a hard thing for me to insert it. Night Stalkers, though, was pretty jam-packed with weirdness and gruesomeness, and probably in my head, I figured, do I need one more rotting body part in this book? I mean, there's just, there's an abundance of them, and I don't really know that terror would have been Bobby's cup of tea. I think that she saw a legitimate sort of commercial appeal to bringing together a set of books as a commercial entity, meaning the Midnight Suns were supposed to be kind of her X-Men in a way, right? A group of titles that existed in one way or the other together. They sort of had their own little universe, just like the X-Men did. And terror was weird, right? Terror is weird, even beyond the norm of some other things. So I think the harshness of it, the unremitting savagery of him in a way, the complete and utter snark, like there's very little about him in my memory or in rereading it, that is redeemable. I mean, I think he's great. I mean, but I mean, he had a set identity, and he didn't really deviate from it. There wasn't suddenly a lot of turning point moments where, oh no, I'm really a nice guy. He was like this, and so I don't really think that if I had gone to Bobby and said, hey, why aren't we having this guy in here? Let's bring this title in and throw Midnight Suns thing and on top of it. I don't think that would have been greeted with a lot of enthusiastic embrace. And as I said, I probably in the back of my head said, there's not enough room in this coffin for one more uh, one more body or body part.
Yeah, that Midnight Sun stuff. I mean, it was good, but I mean, I was reading Ghost Rider and stuff at the time. It did seem very busy, so it's like, yeah, I don't know if there'd be room for terror.
All that. It was pretty busy, and it was a lot of. I mean, you guys have heard me pick at myself, throughout the course of these things. So thank you for the therapy time. But it's. I look at some of the Midnight Sun stuff sometimes, like, man, could I just have had these guys smile a couple of times? They were like just I mean, frankly, terror smiles more than any one of them. They're just a bunch of grim individuals in Night Stalkers.
So. It was the 90s, though. I mean, people weren't allowed to smile. Even Spider-Man, none of them were allowed to smile.
Yeah, but I mean, like I'm saying, like Terror was joking every other page. He was having a ball. Like he wasn't, he was. But the Night Stalkers, man, they were just angry people.
So how did you come up with the actual concept of Terror taking off the body parts? Just to get into some therapy, apparently.
Yeah, therapy. Listen, I'll tell you something after I tell you the story of it, that I've become convinced of over time, which is weird. And it's just probably me, drinking things with too much lead in them. But I was working on the St. George book, right? And my co-writer was a woman named Margaret Clark. And we were on coming into the plotting of the second issue. We'd set up the first issue, which is essentially an origin story of St. George, and he's off to the races. And we knew that in the second issue, we had to sort of establish some kind of adversary, hopefully like a big bad that would become something of continuity, right? That felt right, that we'd start to introduce things that would keep coming back and not just be a one-off. And we were struggling. We were hitting a wall beyond walls. Every character and concept we came up felt lame or been there, done that. We really liked the St. George character. We were trying to take the whole Shadowline assignment very seriously because Archie Goodwin had kind of given us these books, which was kind of a miracle out of nowhere. Why did you give us these 3 titles to write? We're relative nobodies at the time. And we were working at Margaret's apartment in Brooklyn. And she had no air conditioning, and it was this hot, fetid New York City day. And I remember this distinctly because my allergies were killing me, right? My allergies were like summer, I guess, like ragweed. My eyes were burning.
I can relate.
You can relate, okay? So drops, cold rags. I'm probably useless as much as anything else. Like we're writing together, but I'm contributing nothing except complaining and in pain, and nothing is working to alleviate this allergy, redness, itching. And I just remember throwing my head back at one point and just saying, I would kill for somebody to come and rip the eyes out of my head. I literally said that, and in that moment, like there was this long pause, and I kind of opened my eyes and I said to Margaret, what if that was it? What if it was a guy who could take people's body parts and do something with them, right? And then, we bounce back and forth. And then, what if he could take their abilities? And not only did that become Terror, right? Or Shrek, at that point, because we were so, pleased with ourselves. You know what? We'll call him Shrek. And this was before the kids' book, So, Shrek means terror. And we'll show how clever and well read we are by putting another language on it. But in that very second, Lilith, that stopped. The allergies completely vanished, right? And I am convinced over the years that all I was like a conduit for this character, like who just was like looking, like sort of like in a Freddy Krueger or whatever way to kind of break through to our reality. And I had nothing to do beyond that with the creation. So then we wrote it up, and Klaus Janson was the artist on the St. George title at the time. So we sort of had a vague, description of him. Very well dressed. He's a bit on the rotting side. And Klaus came back with the rest of it. Like Klaus just introduced. We didn't have anything about the spikes. We might have had something about the long coat, because of the well dressed part. But the metal hand, I don't think we had. So Klaus introduced that, which, then we, as a sort of an interesting little character twist. So we started backwards engineer the reasons for that out of that. So it was cool. It was really cool to sort of see that just come to life in that way.
Very neat. Because that's just like, oh, who could ever come up with something like that?
Yeah.
This man, I think he has a body parts fetish. I mean, Surgeon General. I mean, he's got a body parts.
It's that was why didn't I just team those guys up? That was a lost opportunity, right? To sort of bring that back around.
Plus, we're finding out it's never too late. The 90s is the thing now. If you got a way to pitch something, do it. They'll take it at this point.
Oh yeah, I mean, Ben Riley's back. I mean,
yeah, I just saw that. I saw that Mark DeMatteis was working on some stuff, but which is great.
I mean, I don't know if you saw what they're doing with Elektra. I mean, they're doing that.
Oh yeah, the whole woman without fear. But that's been building for a while. So that's pretty. That looks great. I mean, that's always
when you look at it from a business perspective, you're like, oh yeah, they were always going to do that, weren't they?
Yeah, I would guess so. Like probably the first time that they did that cover, illustration, somebody in the licensing division said, ka-ching, and just said we're gonna get some toys out around this. And
oh, there you go, Terror toys, man. Like
I thought
potato head, but you just like pull the part.
Exactly. I was so disappointed one time. I got an email from a reader, a fan, and he said, would you be willing to sign something? I said, of course, if I send it to you. And then he said, it's the Funko Terror figure. And I was like, there's a Funko Terror figure? What are you talking about? And I expected to get this thing in the mail that would be like a Mr. Potato Head, swappable parts, a little mini trench coat, a big head with big spikes. And instead it was this lame purple Deadpool. I guess Terror had appeared in this thing.
The League of Losers. Yeah,
League of Losers, or the Mercs with a Mercs for Money or something like that. And he just showed up as dressed in a Deadpool costume, a purple Deadpool costume, which just completely, like, clearly when you create a character for Marvel or any entity, it's out of your control at a certain point. But I left a lot of clues of how to do this character. I left a very clear roadmap of how he dresses, how he talks, how he acts. And of course they can change that, but that was so far like outside the norm. So of course I signed it for the guy, and I hope he's happy with it, but it was just the weirdest thing.
Now we're gonna have to make a custom Funko Pop for DJ.
Well, or even better, like Phil's sort of saying, I could see, I've got like this great, it's around here somewhere, it's like the new, these new Hasbro figures they're doing for some of the characters. So I got the new Daredevil one, and it's got a couple of swappable like heads, right? There's a Matt Murdock head, there's this, so I could just see that, a Terror figure with a couple of arms, a couple of different legs, be fun,
Oh, but yeah, I was reading this. He made the comment. He's on the West Coast. He's like, yeah, I don't work in New York. All those wisecracking around. So is that just like a story point? So it's like, yeah, this is why a lot of the Marvel universe hasn't run into him before, because he
definitely. That was like because that was the first. I believe that was the first issue, so it was definitely like a way to sort of start to lay some seeds of why he was a bit on the down low. Although later we would have Doctor Strange show up and tacitly acknowledge he knew aspects of him. Later on we would have a crossover with Wolverine, because of course why not, and make a sort of suggestion that they had some history because they were both killers, of a certain sort. So there were places where, we started to kind of make a nod, and then we could do that great reverse engineering around character history.
Oh yeah, there's a we might get to that in December. Yes, there's a 2-issue Wolverine arc you did. Yes.
Yeah, that was fun. It was
with
good.
Terror. But no, the arc after this one, the one where we read for this, the Punisher shows up. I mean, talk about killers.
Yeah, well, now I didn't reread all the Punisher issues, but I could sort of remember those. But
yeah. So Well, when he shows up in Dead Man's Hand, was that your idea, or were they?
Oh
like,
yeah, everything with Terror was my idea. I mean, nobody. The only other person playing with him, at any degree, was probably Greg Wright, my friend Greg Wright, and then the completely bizarro crossover, we would do with Luke Cage and Silver Sable, and so Luke Cage was Marcus McLaurin, and we were friends as well as co-professionals on things. So it was mercenary on our part to sort of say, all right, let's do crossovers. Not that any of those titles were the most commercial, of things, but we figured, okay, crossovers always can be a promotable event. And isn't it nicer to sort of work with people you really enjoy working with than trying to kind of force fit something? So we would go, we went away, we came up with this whack job, storyline in that case, and then just pitched it. And then the coordination of it became very easy because we could trade story parts instead of body parts across the 3 titles relatively easily.
And I'm sure you had long-term plans for this character, because even in Dead Man's Hand, like, he does a favor for Daredevil. He's like, I'll do this for you, but maybe one day when I come to New York, I'm going to need someone in my corner. So
right. I don't do favors, I accumulate debts, which is one of his catchy phrases and stuff. No, absolutely. I mean, I mean, as much as I loved writing Daredevil, and I did love writing that. I mean, I can't think of a thing I worked on, with the exception of maybe the Strange Days movie adaptation, which I had to write like in a day and a half, that I didn't enjoy writing. But of all of them, I think this character was the most fun and the most bizarre, and never really felt like much of a stretch, which I guess is disturbing. And maybe you guys should think about doing more of these chats based on that. But by that, I mean, it was the stories just kind of came to you, right? And he could play across such a wide range of things. He could be a straight up mobster tale, which is essentially what the Punisher tale is, right, Lilith? If you look at that. This one, which we kicked it off with, which might have been a quote unquote mistake, but I don't think so. But it's a pretty fringe Marvel history, supernatural story. But he could play in both worlds. The Wolverine story later on is a kind of an eco-terrorism story in the Wolverine title itself, right? So there was lots of different, I think, genres this character could fit into with kind of ease, if you get over the fact he literally looks like death and has a little bit of a skin issue.
I mean, look at Deadpool.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And they found a great formula, for that, to work with. But this was far, far darker, in its own way, and even more twisted. But yeah, I mean, there's similarities certainly in a merc with a mouth and a somebody's mouth. But I would I mean, I couldn't tell you there were specific story point choices, or he needed to kind of get here, but we had no intention of sort of ending the book where we did, and even in ending the book where we did was a bit of a surprise, because we knew the sales weren't where they needed to be. And I think a little bit of that was.
I think you were a little too ahead of your time. I think that they called the callback to like the horror stuff a little too early. I think had they waited a couple of years, that could have been even a little bit bigger, and we might be having a different conversation.
I agree, and I think the whole Midnight Suns thing is like that, as well. So
great idea. It's all about timing, though.
Yeah, and sometimes it seems like it's the right time, and you just sort of jump into it, and then you find out later, oh, okay, that wasn't quite right. How many TV shows in the 80s, 90s were tried that long form storytelling thing, but TV at that point was, for the most part, still very singular. Maybe a 2-episode thing was a big deal.
And it was the finale, so you had to come back.
Right. But you know,
yeah, definitely.
I mean, you wrote a great story. I just think, yeah, like Lil said, the timing. I mean, you in the age of pouches. I don't know if, yeah, because even the Midnight Sun stuff. I mean, it just seemed like it was there and then it was gone after a while. Like, I mean, even Ghost Rider went his separate ways with everyone. So yeah, I mean, like you said, just the timing.
Well, it was also, I think you get into, I think part of the timing is also we're much more. Audiences can be much more singular now than they were then, right? The audience mentality and probably the overall audience approach, even from a Marvel at that point, was all or nothing. It's either the big, Marvel universe, right, all together, or it's nothing. Whereas now, you've got these sort of like fringe audiences. I mean, you could have been my wife became a Supernatural fan, right? The TV show.
I'm so sorry, sir.
Well, no. Another therapy.
Supernatural
if you want to have her on, for her own show. But she fell into that and watched, binge watched, a lot of them. But that show was on for what, 14 years, 15 years, something. I never heard of it. I mean, I heard of it, but I never watched it. So I think, when you've got, 700 channels and 400 streaming services, now you've got these sort of niche audiences that could sort of be appealing in that way, where, the Midnight Suns was, for as many titles as it was, I always felt was very insular, right? The horrific things around it were very insular to that world. And as, I mean, any group of titles can be that way. Try to get into the mutant titles at any given time.
Oh, yeah.
It's impenetrable. So Terror was definitely his own thing. I mean, one of my, favorite reviews was, I think Cliff Biggers wrote it. But I'm sure I have it in my Sad Glory Days clipping file. But it was basically, it started off like this. There's nothing else like this in the Marvel universe. This was about terror. And maybe that's a good thing. And so, okay, I'll take that. I'll go with that. But, you have to either treat something like that really special and go to the right audiences and cater for it. Or again, the timing is just off because that's not what Marvel wants to do, right? Why did Vertigo, and I'm not trying to put terror, within a Vertigo-like area, but yeah, I will. I think it would have fit well, like a character like that in a certain way. But, they treated those titles right? The Vertigo books, for as an example, were their own thing. Marvel tried to do certain things, and that's certainly what Epic was doing at a lot of ways. And Marcus definitely was in the zone of that thinking, but Marcus also had many responsibilities beyond Terror Incorporated and all those things. So, we couldn't suddenly just become a complete pocket universe unto ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's that is a great point. I think that's the big thing. Yeah, I mean, if Terror could have stayed his own thing, like you mentioned, the Vertigo line. I mean, like like Hellblazer, Lilith. I mean, they kept John Constantine.
Well, yeah, we're keeping that title alive, but barely.
Yeah, but during the Vertigo era, yeah,
Vertigo. They learned the niche market very quickly,
right,
and fostered it and cared for it, and yeah.
That would be the crossover I'd love to see, Terror and John Constantine.
It'd be the trench coat brigade, right? It was all everyone who had the a lot of long coats in that day and age. But I wore a long coat in that day and age. I still wear long coats, so that's there you go. So,
back in the day, yeah.
He's a very fascinating character. I will say that I was like, why did they change it from Shrek to Terror? And why did it take them so long to acknowledge it was the same person? I'm so confused, Marvel.
Well, I mean, we changed it because obviously Shrek was
where's the movie come
specific in that. No, I don't even know if that was there was nothing about the movie at that point. Nothing about the movie. It was the break between the Shadowline universe and Marvel. And also even though they own both, and it was also, Marvel sometimes is a little bit more of a, of a 2x4 in terms of what is the guy? Is the guy Shrek? What is a Shrek? Shrek is the German word for terror. Let's just call him Terror. I mean, nobody said anything like that, but it made sense. And certainly the way he referred to himself over time, even within the Shadowline books, right? He'd introduce himself. Ultimately, he'd be known as Shrek, but he would throw out the I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other thing. And he does much the same thing in the Marvel title. Now, Marcus was the ultimate good soldier. Marcus knew, because he had worked with us, at Epic, and we had known each other forever. So he knew who the character was. But because Marvel didn't want to acknowledge the Shadowline or try to get into the canon of continuity of, was there a dimensional rift? How did he step through the, Earth, 616 or whatever? Nobody wanted to get involved with that, because then that would, I don't know, they just didn't want to. So Marcus would always say, nope, they have similarities, but they're not the same character. Whereas I would do interviews and I would say, please, they're the same character. I mean, at one point there's a line, I'm not sure if it's in this, grouping or maybe a little bit later, where he even says, I knew somebody once who had a St. George complex. It's again, the names are the same. The look is the same. The powers are the same. The way he speaks is the same. The catchphrases, it's nothing personal. It's just business. It's all the same thing. And Marcus nowadays will, of course, completely acknowledge that, but because that wasn't
it's canon now. It's in the handbook since 2009. So it's canon now.
How did they explain it in the handbooks? Did they explain
it?
They
just said yes, they're the same person.
Okay,
basically,
they didn't come up with some dimensional rift or whatever. So, I mean, how could you? The thing when I was really ticked off after they canceled the title, right? And I was, because they had actually promised us, we'll give you to issue 20 to turn it around, right? Which is why you were starting to see like a lot more guest stars and things toward the latter half of the run. And so, Phil, if there was any plans, it was to boost the sales, right? In a way, in a good way that sort of still made sense. So when they suddenly just said, no, it's dead at 13, I was ticked off. And I went to Carl and I was, ranting and venting more than ranting probably. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to pick this guy up and I'm going to go somewhere else with him. Just like, anybody at Image did with any of the Marvel characters. They took a clawed guy and now they got a clawed guy, at Image. They took a big bulky guy, now they got a big bulky. I'm just going to take this guy and go somewhere else. And he laughed at me in a good way. And he said, your problem is you actually created something that's so unique, you can't go somewhere else. Like how many clawed guys are? There's a lot of guys with claws. How many, monstrous Hulk-like figures are there? There's a lot of monstrous Hulk-like figures. He said, how many guys can take body parts off somebody else, put them on themselves, get the abilities, do that whole thing? He says, you sort of wrote yourself not into a corner, but into a very unique a place where you can go and do it. But if Marvel wants to come after you, they're gonna have a pretty easy way in if you're gonna keep what's really working about the character. And I don't know that there's that many characters, if any, that do exactly this, even to this day.
I don't think so. You would have gone the creator-owned route, maybe like in an Image book or something like that.
Yeah, I mean that was the venting, part of the exercise of disappointment and sort of saying, because, and it wasn't the hubris of how dare you. I mean, I was an idiot in some ways, but I was very mature in terms of understanding what I was doing when I was signing the vouchers. You're doing work for hire, right? I was never under the sort of mentality of, you can't touch my character. I'm signing this character over to you for the rights to have publishing happen and get, the Marvel spotlight and stuff. But my frustration was, and would remain to this day in some ways, I thought it was a great character with a lot more potential. And there was a lot more stories that could be told with a character in a world like this. Like I said, in some ways it felt like it, over time, it's felt more like it was channeled in. and that's could
Come
just
on,
be me.
they gave you 13. That's
They
kind of
gave me
perfect.
13.
I know they promised you 20, but they gave you 13.
They did give me 13. You're right. There is a beauty to sort of like, let's cap it with 13. And Richard Pace did a very beautiful job at that last story and that last page. He did a terrific job. So it ended on a nice note, for its moment, but it would have been nice to go back and play with that world some more.
Yeah, but
every spooky season, I just keep my fingers crossed. Like, is this going to be the year that they bring it back?
Well, somebody asked me the other day on a different podcast. They said, well, what would you do if you could bring him back and team him up with somebody? And my first thought was, well, why would I have to team him up with anybody? Like, why couldn't he just do his own story? But I actually kind of came up with something in the moment that I said, well, maybe there's something there. Maybe I should go and pitch it to Tom Brevoort and just have him, see if he'd even consider it.
One shots are all the rage nowadays. So
there you go.
Oh my God, they're doing the Death of Doctor Strange right now. How about Terror, Sorcerer Supreme?
There you go. That would work. Well, maybe that's what Strange was worried about at the end of this, Hellfire storyline in the first 5 issues, and maybe that's
or even Damien, because you did try to lay that foundation early on.
Well, that was like perfect frustration of having a lot of story bits built up, because they were relaunching Son of Satan at that point, what would become Hellstrom, or something like that. And as a kid, I wasn't a big Marvel fan, but Son of Satan I loved, right? Son of Satan was evil and nasty and sort of forbidden. And I guess like guys in capes with bare chests and pentagrams. So when I heard they were gonna, and what's wrong with that, right? And so when they were relaunching Son of Satan, I pitched it, right? And I thought I was a shoo-in, right? I figured I've got a reputation now for a lot of horror characters. I worked on all the Clive Barker stuff. I'm known for knowing this kind of, world. And so I was deeply disappointed when what do you mean I didn't get it? And whoever got it was either Rafael Nieves or John Rosem or whoever got it, that's terrific. They got it. And I think they did a good job, but I had all these Son of Satan-ish story bits.
Oh, I saw it.
Yeah. So the Hellfire thing wasn't, oh, this is the story I would have done in Son of Satan, but it was definitely, okay, there's a world here. Let's play with it.
I mean, I get that, you're disappointed when they canceled the book. I mean, this was your character. I mean, unlike I know you love Daredevil, but he was created by someone else. There were how many writers before you and how many writers after you.
Exactly.
But he, you basically, like you mentioned a couple minutes ago, you birthed this character, from your teary eyes and
exactly. The tears were there from the beginning.
Exactly. So I get that, the disappointment, but had you been able to keep going, what were you going to do? Were you going to have like more crossovers, maybe that Daredevil crossover? Or
oh, I'm sure. I mean, I certainly wasn't planting all those seeds for nothing. I mean, I think he was absolutely right in saying, I don't do favors, I accumulate debts. I think he would have gone back and collected from Daredevil and collected from the Punisher, and even in introducing the Hellfire character, we brought him back a little bit more. There'd be more to do there. There was the Strange thing that was seeded there, whether or not that crossed over with the Midnight Suns. There would have been places to play that out. And as I said, I think the essence of the character, while I won't say we were so clever to think about that from the beginning, because again, he was established to be the big bad for St. George. And I think he's accomplished that very well. Crucified him at one point, after all. But
you gotta read those epic books, guys, if you haven't ever stumbled across them.
Those are good. There's
a different universe that I love so much.
There's some really good stuff in there. But I think it would have been, playing with genres, Phil, more than anything else. I think it would have been playing sort of, and we were starting to do that a little bit, right? There was the hardcore storyline with Punisher, which was completely just a complete mobster story, right? It's Piranha Jones, but there's nothing supernatural about those stories except for Terror's gimmick. It's the big guns, and the fact that all those mobster women that's one of them is my mother. But that's but I think it would have been weaving between some of those things. I think there probably would have been a science fiction story or a science fantasy story. That would have been a cool way to play out something with a Fantastic Four like group, or a weird science type of thing. There probably would have been a story where he had to go to New York and he had to play things out in a platform. I felt I was very specific in making some of those choices, not knowing that I would do this in issue 17 or whatever. But there was so much that was established. I think there was a whole Nick Fury Shield story probably packed in there, in the sense of he's the ultimate weapon, right? He's the ultimate espionage thing that Fury could have recruited him or cornered him, and basically dropping him into a situation, probably literally, from a plane with no parachute, and he's just ahead into the desert somewhere, and he has to go and accomplish a mission, from there that nobody else, can in the time. So I think there would have been a lot of places to play that out, in a fun, bizarre, twisted, alternate corner of the Marvel universe sort of way. But
I like your off-brand quirky stuff. I do. I think it's some of your best work, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I look at this and you've heard me be super critical of things, and I read this and I'm like, I think there's technical problems in the placement of some of the word balloons and the captions, in terms of like the way that you as a reader read them. Like they're sort of stacked sometimes in the wrong places. And I think the use of like ellipses and dashes to sort of connect certain things should have been eliminated. That's been one of my Achilles heels early on. I like to sort of like lead into the next thing, but so that would have tightened the story up some. But I look at this and I'm like, yeah, that actually, I was worried when I went to reread it, because I sort of remembered half of it in my mind. And I said, Jesus, there's the dark soul, and there's serpents, and there's hellfire, and there's monks, and there's Alcatraz. And this story must be all over the place. And actually, it's pretty singular in he's got like this, I'm breaking this contract no matter what happens. And for listeners, I don't even know if you can condense this, but basically Terror has to kill an unkillable person. The unkillable person has struck a deal with a demon, and that's keeping the unkillable person alive. So the only way that Terror can break the contract and kill his target is to find the demon, go to a hell, and basically make a new deal that the contract can be broken. And that is so condensed down, that's almost not the story, but I felt like it was going to be all over the place. And yet when I read it, it's like, no, the introduction of Mikhail Draconomagus, which is like, again, that was an example of way too long a name, but I even make fun of myself at one point. So I clearly understood what I was doing. Like at one point somebody says, well, Hellfire is a hell of a lot easier to say than that whole Mikhail Draken, whatever the hell your name is. So I clearly knew what I was getting myself into. And anyway, I think the bizarre.
So were you given the team, or did you kind of call in some favors for the
that was Marcus McLaurin's inspired choice. I mean, we knew Jorge Zafino as a force of nature, and I think that Marcus, I think it came before this. Marcus had worked with Jorge on a Hellraiser story, and that I probably assigned, and Marcus probably finished off, since I kicked off a lot of the stories and then left as the editor. But that story might have been already been in motion. But so he may have had a little bit of a relationship with Jorge. So he picked him. And while I don't think Jorge was the most commercial artist, because his style was so, was not, that's the other thing, and not of the day, right? It wasn't pouches and overworked lines and stuff, but he's brutal, right? In that there's that, if no one knows his art, I really suggest going to find it. It is a force of nature, and it's perfect. There's some places where the coloring gets a little muddy because of the printing at that time. I think it doesn't do it any favors because he has such stark, raw imagery, the way he illustrates. But man, just he defined like the feelings of that moments and that character for me as much as anything more, even more so than I say what Klaus had done. And Klaus obviously did a lot.
Yeah, the art really set the mood for this for me. Yeah, it really well done.
There's a sad, Jorge died way too young. But there was a 2-part terror story that was written as a fill-in, right? Kind of, even I wrote it, even though I would have been filling in for myself, but it was sort of written in case we got off schedule and we needed it. And it was sort of a variation on the Monkey's Paw, the old horror story, the Monkey's Paw, if you know that at all. Do you guys know that story? So Lilith is nodding her head.
Yes.
And just for listeners, just go with it. And so, but Jorge was no longer on the book at that point, right, as the regular artist because of some scheduling conflicts, but he illustrated it. So he actually did the illustrations to this whole 2-part Monkey's Paw story. So it existed, it was done, it was going to, I was then going to script it and it was going to get lettered. And I know it was in Marcus's art files when Marvel had their massive purge of the mid-90s, right? They were in a terrible situation. They laid off a third or more of the editorial staff, canceled titles. It was an awful day, right? And that story went missing, right? And I went into the offices like not too long after, saying, hey, there's the story. What's going to happen with it? And, are we going to publish this because it exists and it's almost done, and trying to scrabble for, table scraps, but also knowing that it was a great, great story. And I started asking around about it, well, it was in Marcus's offices. Where is it now? And it vanished. So somewhere out there in some, awful person, I'm stealing it or losing it. There is 2 issues, 44 pages of Jorge Zafino, Terror Incorporated art. That was a pretty rocking little story. And it's actually one of the few stories I think I've told you guys before. I lost most of my work in a terrible hard drive crash. But I actually have the plots for those 2 stories still.
Oh, that's.
Yeah. And it was just like flipping through because he wasn't rushed. He wasn't under any other pressure. Not that his stuff ever suffered.
Yeah, no.
But it was a tight little story. And Phil, it was a different genre. Again, than sort of like the other stories had been. So it was a different way to play. Terror was acting sort of more like this I don't know, kind of story guide for these weird Monkey's Paw events that were kind of happening through the rest of the tale.
Yeah, because it seems to me that like maybe someone dropped the ball somewhere, because like characters like this, where like you can fit them into many different genres, seem like they go really far. Look at Spider-Man. You can drop him in, street level. Sometimes he's fighting more cosmic villains, with an Avengers or something.
Yeah, I think it just needed more of its own. Obviously, at some point or another, it's got to find an audience, and maybe again, the way the world was now, the world was then, it would never have found an audience, even if Marvel had decided to put more effort behind it. But I sort of feel the way the world is now, it probably would find a smaller, unique audience, and that would be kind of.
I'm just saying, Netflix would have called you. That's all I'm saying.
And Netflix may still call me. Who knows? I had somebody call me, and it was a guy who had written some real stuff, and he was interested in sort of the Shadowline stuff a few years ago.
Oh.
And so he kind of contacted me, basically, to try to find out who had the rights. And I was like, well, I worked on all this stuff. If you ever want any, click. So wherever he went with that, hasn't come to fruition yet. So
would that be Marvel Disney, or
nowadays? Yeah, it would be Marvel Disney. It's all the Shadowline stuff. The Shadowline stuff was the only work that ever came out from Epic that was not creator owned.
Oh.
So that was created by Archie Goodwin while he worked on staff at Marvel for Marvel, the entity, even though it came out under Epic, it's all company owned properties. So all that stuff is within their IP. Although I saw, and I have no idea what it's about, but I was doing some research on something. I think I was looking for a copy of the Shadowline promotional poster for something for my newsletter, which we'll plug in a few minutes. But it was there was another bunch of comics that had Shadowline in the title. So Marvel has, I think, probably screwed the pooch on holding on to that as
shocking.
As a committed IP, right? They should have shut them down and kept a closer eye on that, because whether they want to do anything with those properties or not,
although with the mouse money behind them, they can get it back if they want it.
They can, but you've diluted it. You've allowed somebody else to use it and use it with without any I don't know what the term would be. Tara would know what the term is, a legal term, a business term.
In Latin. No
doubt. Exactly. So, damn, Phil, that was it. That was I should have sent you that line. That was so well timed. But that's a dilution, of their IP in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we're going to see him in live action, just because I think the line is so.
Well, when Moon Knight was getting his own, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe they'll bring everything back, because that's how it started.
I was going to say, we're probably going to get a Ghost Rider first, but I mean, it's probably too late now. But I think Tara would have been a good fit in the Moon Knight series. I mean, I don't know exactly what they're doing.
It's never too late. They're going to milk that series for all.
It's sort of, this is the thing. I mean, this is the beauty of the Marvel universe, and then potentially the Marvel Cinematic Universe on things, or whatever, or the Marvel Gaming Universe, for that matter, because they can mine things well or mine things terribly.
Terror will be OP as heck in a game.
Yeah. I mean,
in the MMO, he would be way too OP. You'd need like 1,000,000 bajillion points for him.
It would be, I mean, in the third Blade movie, which is maybe one of those things you don't speak about in daylight. But there was, they mentioned, they call themselves the Night Stalkers or something. They're not really, right? The side team with Ryan Reynolds or whatever. And they call themselves Night Stalkers. They're not really the Night Stalkers, but clearly they pulled that title from the book, right? And because I came up with that title for the book. But it wasn't that exactly, so who knows? There could be something, and suddenly some shambling corpsey guy shows up and he's in the background of something. I mean, they're doing a whole
I think Moon Knight's gonna be that pocket universe where that's possible. I'm just gonna keep my fingers crossed and hope they call you.
I mean, there's this whole game coming out from the game company that made XCOM, if you guys are gamers, and Lil, it sounds like you are, at least, and so it's called Midnight Suns with a U instead of an O. So that's coming out next year, and it's not the exact team, right? It's not, but it's a lot of them. And then they threw in some extras, then they threw in some more A-list things like Iron Man and a couple of other things. So, but it's got Lilith in it, and it's got Blade and Ghost Rider, and it sounds like they're cribbing from aspects of the story. I think probably just enough so they could use it, and not enough so they'll ever acknowledge us or pay us. So
maybe you'll get a gift certificate.
I would game. That would be cool. I would one of those little thank you screens. I expect nothing, I expect nothing beyond that, but I expect at least that, because we can do a Midnight Suns special sometime, but
we'll see that story on the internet soon. It'll be like, Dan Chichester got a thank you in the credits, but they misspelled his last name.
Exactly. That was right. Danny G Chichester is how they'd list me, or something, like with G, like GEE or something. Yeah, that's exactly how it'll work out for me.
But yeah, no, I'm just waiting for them to reintroduce Terror, live action in the comics. It can be like, oh, where have you been, for the longest time? And he could probably be like, yeah, I took a decade or two off, gone into politics,
Well, he showed up in that Mercs for Money thing.
Yeah.
There was the
2009, I think, is the last time we've seen him with the Ultimates.
There was the Robert Kirkman League of Losers, which I didn't read, but I heard was okay.
I liked it.
And then there was the David Lapham Max series, which looked like he actually at least nodded to some of the continuity, but I didn't read that, so I don't know. I don't know how it played out. Did you guys read that one or?
Mm-mm.
I didn't read that one, but I like Kirkman. I like I was like, I get why he would pick him, rotting corpse, the whole zombie.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But and so it hasn't been used, and there's lots of other shinier things to play with. So and I think it's the sort of thing that if a character appeals to a creator who's working on something, that's why they're going to say, I'm going to bring this in and do something with it. I mean, and you never know what happens on things like that. I mean, it's easy to forget now that in the late 80s, 90s, Swamp Thing was a fringe character 2 issues away from cancellation, right? There was no, Alan Moore, Steve Bissett, John Totleben, come in and save this title. It was like, we're house cleaning, just wrap this up.
I don't care that you have 2 movies and a TV show.
but so that was an instance of creators looking at something and saying, nobody's paying any attention to this, and we're going to go and do what we want, and then inject the right things at the right time. And then there were enough people around that within the DC editorial universe to coddle it and treat it right and see that this is something special and help foster it, right? And that was
Crisis was coming. So what did they have though?
right. But was that the first Vertigo title or one of the first ones? Or I think that was probably the segue into Vertigo in a lot of ways, was Swamp Thing. And so it was like, okay, weird things like this that are appealing to certain people in certain ways deserve
more. Yeah. Make the nerds bleed.
And for the most part, you got what you were well rewarded, right? If you were into that type of story, and by that I mean really good, mature stories that you weren't finding anywhere else for the most part, you were well rewarded if you put your money down on a Vertigo title.
I think they bring down the axe too quick on some of these titles, especially these days, because wasn't like Detective Comics always, there was a period where they were gonna like close the cancellation. They're like,
they say that. And then they're like, oh wait, we named our whole company after this.
Yeah. If you remember,
Batman book, they're gonna cancel I mean, that's half of DC's line right now is Batman.
There was 11 Batman books this week. Hashtag never forgive, never forget.
If you can't be yourself, be Batman, or one of the 11 titles,
Exactly.
Oh no, I mean, a couple months ago we talked to Mark Waid, and he even said, he's like, Batman is the fictional character who's had more stories written about him than any other character in human history.
And you're like, that can't be right, and then you remember, it might be.
I mean, there were times there was 4 books, book a week, and it's
yeah.
They do
and that's where comics become both wonderful and also impenetrable, like for some people, right? Where do I start? Where do I get in on this? If I get in on this Batman title and I really dig this, and then I pick up this other one, if it's not really coordinated or it's a completely different thing, do I need to shift my mental state to appreciate it? So
yeah. Well, I think that's why they do a lot of miniseries, especially Batman, and even at Marvel, a lot of their books they'll give them like 5 issues, and I guess see how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, but that's continuity is the bane of American comics in a lot of ways, because
nobody even cares about it anymore at this point.
Well, some editorial person thinks you do. So,
who can I write? I will get a petition. Who can I write?
I mean, I've become like a big fan of a certain type of manga, recently. I was reading a lot of these horror mangas. We're in October, so we'll talk about that for two seconds. But just appreciating how these things are clearly written out as shorter stories, a part of a longer work. So you're getting a 15-page whatever chapter that's then going to become part of a 400-page ultimate story. But these 15-page chapters allude to the world, but they don't feel like they need to be beholden and shackled to the next part so much. And I think that's there's a kind of a nice lyrical beauty to that as a reader, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is like filling in the gaps, or coming at it from here. And I still see how it's part of this whole big eerie tale, but it didn't need to be that, well, part 3, synced into part. Yeah, exactly. So there's lessons to be learned there.
It is a very fast growing market. Every year is always doing better than last year. So I think there's a reason for that, and that's one of them for sure.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, you go in Barnes and Noble, their section keeps growing and growing.
Right. So. Right.
Yeah, meanwhile, the comic book section keeps shrinking.
Well, it's
but you should be going to your local comic book shops anyway.
You should be. You should be going to your local comic shops, and if you can't get to it, you should go on. If your library has Hoopla, Hoopla is a great way that to get into comics, and there's a paid system there that those the way that works is there is something going back to the publishers and going back to the creators through that. So it's not like you're just borrowing the comic. I believe, as far as I understand it, but that's a great way to get exposed to things. So comic shops first, and read, like, it's cool. And if you could find Terror, read that, but I don't think Terror's on anything. So
I was say, did they ever reprint that or anything? Because I did the old back issue search, and
so the guys I was talking to the other day, and I'm not going to plug a different podcast on your podcast, but they're very nice. It was specifically about like Terror, kind of like this one is, and he said he couldn't find it on Comixology or anything, or Marvel Unlimited, which means Marvel Unlimited is limited. So
yeah,
that would be Marvel is limited.
Well, just like DC Infinite's not so infinite.
Exactly. So, which is weird, because it's sort of like, what's it take to just scan it? It doesn't. It's not a.
They probably just have
I'm
one.
lucky though. My comic book guy, like, his little, excuse the word, fetish. He loves Epic, so I always have he always has a ton of back issues.
That's cool. That's
Epic
cool.
comics, and I'm just I actually found them there, the Terror ones there 3 years ago. Yeah. So. Yeah,
the Epic stuff was there was some really great unique stuff worked on, and that probably skewed me as much as anything. Like, working for Epic damaged me in a good way in terms of sensibilities.
It was a very unique proposition, and it's something that I feel like Marvel should just kind of think about. It's okay to not be mainstream all the time. That's all I'm saying.
That was the appeal of Epic. Epic was eclectic. Epic was creator owned. Epic was a way to entice in people who normally wouldn't work for Marvel. And that was the trick, right? That was the shell game of it, in a way. Was you had such a great time working at Epic, and most of the creators, I would say, did, on your own property. Hey, why don't you come over and work on a Marvel property now? In which they might not have the same good experience, but maybe they would. And we suddenly had somebody who normally wouldn't think about working for Marvel, because Marvel had, I'm not going to work on that stuff. Well, I just had a great experience working with Archie Goodwin, which is not a surprise, and his team, and they took really good care of me, and we infected some of Marvel with that stuff. I mean, do you remember a series called Havoc Wolverine? Did you guys ever see this? So Havoc, you got to look it up. Havoc Wolverine.
Oh,
which is Havoc.
Yeah. The Meltdown thing or whatever.
Yeah, Havoc Wolverine Meltdown. Yeah. So Walt Simonson, Wheezy Simonson wrote it, and then Jay Muth and Kent Williams illustrated it. Right. So, but they're fine illustrators. They're fine painters. So the whole thing is fully painted, and they came out of Epic, right? They came out of work that we had done there, and they had done successful books for Epic, Moonshadow and Blood, and that allowed them to sort of move into that world. Now, some people in the sales department was like, this would sell a lot better if it looked normal, and yes, it might. Thank you very much for your. Very informed opinion.
Sales are the suits of the comic book.
It was such an ignorant statement, but then and now. But that's a perfect example, right, of taking people who probably wouldn't have come in the front door, or been seen even maybe by certain people within the Marvel side of editorial initially. Like if Jay Muth had come up with his artwork at a convention and said, "Hey, I'd like to work on Wolverine," I don't see it, right? But because Jay Muth now is known for this beautiful artwork, many, many issues of Moonshadow, and had a reputation there, then it allowed for opening it up and saying, okay, let's try this out.
But all right, I don't mean to keep you here for 100 years, but did they ever reprint any of the Epic stuff even anywhere in like a trade or anything? Or
no. I mean, and I think that's probably well worth doing, because I think there's, I think it's. I have gone back and reread some of that again, and again, that nervousness is like, boy, I bet you this sucks, and it actually works really well, and there's a pretty deep, contained story. But no, I think that's probably below the radar, for most folks to take the individual, because there was 3 series. There's Dr. Zero, St. George, and Powerline, and then they ran about 8 or 9 issues each. And then we collected them all into something called Critical Mass, which was a big mega series that took all the different storylines and brought them together and pretty much wrapped them up, figuring we weren't coming back to this world. But if they ever did want to go back, you could probably do it.
Yeah, because I mean, I just hearing you talk about it and Lilith raves about them. I mean, I'd love to read them. So I mean, I would pay if they collected those. I would buy those. I mean, they should collect Terror, and if the sales are there, maybe think about starting something new.
Yeah, I mean, it's and what we've been speaking about. It's nowadays the audience is not. You could collect them into a PDF collection or a Comixology collection or a Marvel Unlimited collection, and just do something like that, as opposed to having to say, oh, I got to commit to a giant size, published thing. There's certainly different ways of kind of coming at it, which is the beauty of it. I think usually around Christmas, I usually reprint the Terror Incorporated Christmas issue myself and just hand it out as like a Christmas card. But which again, like Phil, like genres, like somebody took me to task, like some blogger, never search for yourself on the interwebs unless you really want to, you hope for the best, and then you find somebody who just hates what you did. And I came across this guy who he basically called me insane and deranged, but not in a good way. Like
I was gonna say, we say that all the time, but
I know, but this Christmas issue he just couldn't wrap his head around like what I was doing to Christmas with this character. Which he's absolutely right, but that was the point of it. Like the whole point of it is I'm telling a Christmas story with a rotting corpse of a mercenary assassin.
Has he never seen The Grinch?
I don't know.
Our good friend D.G. Chichester made Baby Jesus cry.
Exactly. No, that would be great cover copy blurb, and that would probably sold a few issues. This issue, we make Baby Jesus cry,
Get some headlines.
Exactly.
All right. Any other questions for this man, Lilith Hellfire?
Not at all.
All right, sir. Where can people get the newsletter and anything else you want to?
Well, thanks again, guys. This is a kick as always. Please, if your listeners would check out storymaze.substack.com. That's my ongoing newsletter, which has new fiction. At some point, I may talk about Terror Incorporated more, recommendations of other storytelling, that I'm digging that people might like as well. So that comes out every week. So please check that out.
All right. And next time, you've mentioned this issue. I think it's one of your favorites. I know it's one of mine. We'll go back to Daredevil 304.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
I need to be hyped for that one. It's a good one. It's a nice one and done and something different, but I really enjoy it.
Me too. We'll see that. We'll see each other then.
All right. So yes, thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure, and I know everyone enjoys these. So yes, thank you for always giving us your time. And we'll see you in a month for Daredevil
Okay.
304. All right.
My pleasure. See you guys then.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
So